This is Do You Know Jack, the podcast, and of course on the line with me I have the man, myth, and legend himself, George Lynch. How you doing, man?
Good, good. It's hard to live up to an introduction like that.
Yeah, you're not in the minority by that response. Every time I use that to introduce an artist, it's pretty common. Oh, that's a pretty tough introduction there. but
Yeah.
But I mean, you've got some accomplishments behind your belt, and of course, I think one of the unique things about you yourself as an artist is you're always doing things, right? You're always working on things, and this new project with Jeff Pilson is definitely one of those things. And I think another thing you got going is a dream punk project. That's another thing that's dropped on my lap. So it's really neat to see that you're still keeping current and keeping yourself busy, man. Congrats and kudos to you.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I have a hard time saying no.
You and me both, man. You and me both. Yeah. No doubt. Well, now let's talk a little bit about this record, because I'm talking about the one you're doing with Jeff Pilson, Heavy Hitters, just dropped maybe on Friday, actually, Friday the 18th. One of the interesting things I think about this particular project is the choice of songs. I mean, some of these seem maybe a little out of left field for somebody of your hard rock ilk and stature.
Well, I mean, I guess left field is a matter of perspective. For us, the idea was to take a couple of songs from 5 previous decades,
right,
roughly, and address those songs. So we had to pick 2 songs from, the 60s, and 2 songs from the 70s, and 2 songs from the 80s, that kind of thing.
Right.
Pretty hard to pick 2 songs from a whole 10 years of music from every genre.
Yeah.
I mean, but we wanted it to be a little bit, some of the selection to be a little bit surprising, and not, just, they're, redoing AC/DC and Zeppelin or Stones, whatever, Judas Priest songs. I mean, we wanted to have it be a little bit of a stretch to where we're just not doing a rock song in a different rock style.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing too is that, when you do something like this, I mean, it's kind of risky because you don't really know how something's going to come out and how it's going to work until you do it. And then you just have to live with it at that point, So I don't think all the songs are a hit. I think some of them are misses. I would say the REM song in particular was, I wasn't really feeling that one. There are a couple songs on there that I would quite honestly just skip over.
Fair enough.
But there are some, in fact, the majority of them are compelling, and were justified. The making of the record, I listened to them, and they really have an effect on me, and hopefully for everyone,
So now, how did this work, George? I mean, did you and Jeff get together and, you mentioned 5 decades. So, I mean, I guess, did each of you pick one song from each of those 5 decades, or was it a little bit more democratic and mutual with the songs?
Well, we had a master list that Jeff and I came up with, and then the label also, we asked the label if they had any ideas, and they came up with a really pretty hefty list of their own, and just trying to be helpful.
Yeah.
They weren't dictating anything, and so then we put their list over our list, and we got like hundreds of songs to pick, at least maybe 100 or something. I don't know, huge list, and we had to whittle that down. And we had some other ideas that came a little afterwards that Will Martin, the singer, recommended, and it's a lot of back and forth, and it took a while to whittle it down to 10 songs, but. There's never a perfect list, when you're doing something like that, because there's so many options. It could have went so many different ways. But we're hoping we can do more of these records, these heavy hitter records. And if that works out, what we may do is do, one option is we might do one album per decade, let's say.
Oh, that's interesting.
So you can just concentrate on the 60s and say, okay, well, 10, 11 songs out of that decade, and then
One thing I'm interested too is, I mean, not to fixate too much on the song selection, George, but I mean, I Feel the Earth, for instance, by Carole King. I mean, that's a pretty iconic song. So I would imagine you and Jeff and I guess Brian too, you'd have to tread lightly to try and make sure you respect it, but also make it your own, right?
Yeah, that was actually Brian's idea. Brian did come up with some ideas for songs. Brian's more of a music history buff than either Jeff or I would say. He's really kind of knows a lot more about, a lot of old music,
Right.
where we were all there and we grew up with it, we're aware of it, and, we know some stuff obviously, but he's more of like a history student of especially 70s music. So
Yeah.
he was pulling some good stuff out of his hat, and that was one of his picks. And, but yeah, he came up with that song, and then I came up with the idea of treating it almost like Perfect Circle or Tool. Kind of went that approach, and we put those two things together. I think it was really, really cool the way it came out. It's just like unexpected. So to me, it was a worthy attempt at covering the song because it was so different.
Yeah.
Where there are other songs that on the record where that didn't happen, and I still like the song. But for instance, the "Ordinary World" by Duran Duran, I didn't really treat it that much differently.
Fair enough.
Yeah, it's pretty close to the original, maybe more close than I'd want it to be, but it's great. But the original song's great, So it has this, what I loved about the original version of the Duran Duran song, it had this kind of majesty and this powerful, epic kind of thing to it. And you don't really want to lose that. So we kind of had to make it the same, but just a little heavier,
sure.
More add our style to it. But the Carole King song is, it's like a folk pop song. So it was a whole other different thing. So we were able to just, reinvent it, so to speak. Just by playing it with different instrumentation.
Did you ever have a chance to see Duran Duran live during their heyday, or were you too busy sort of doing the Dawkins thing? Like, are you sort of a closeted or maybe like not so closeted fan of Duran Duran then, George?
I'm actually, it was one of the bands I never really got into, although I was highly exposed to them. I mean, they were 80s bands, obviously.
Yeah.
So, hyped at MTV and everything. So, but I don't think I ever went and saw them. I was never really a fan. I didn't really like them, except for Ordinary World.
Interesting.
Yeah, like I never liked the Smiths, but except for the one How Soon Is Now. I mean, I loved that song.
Yeah, that's a good one.
But everything else was just like, wait a minute, that's on the same album as this awesome song with all these other dumb songs. I couldn't stand anything else they did except for that one song. And I kind of felt that way about Duran Duran too. I just loved Ordinary World, and I was like, did somebody else write this, or what the hell's going on with this song? So different than anything else. But
yeah, it's amazing to think about how big Duran Duran is, but you can at the same time distill their entire catalog down to like Rio, Hungry Like the Wolf, and Ordinary World probably as well.
Probably like every band, when you go see them live, you probably recognize a few more songs than you thought you would. But
yeah,
I find that happens frequently. I would go see an old band, a classic rock band or whatever, and then I'll say, "Whoa, I didn't realize that."
Yeah.
ELO had 10 hits.
Yeah, exactly. Well, now you had so many choices with the 90s stuff, and I mean, obviously you went with Joan Osborne, but surprisingly, maybe at the same time, Oasis and Champagne Supernova, which, I mean, I love that song, don't get me wrong, but you had a wide swath, and what was the the reason for choosing Champagne Supernova, even just amongst Oasis songs?
Because Wonderwall had been gunned to death, and arguably so is Champagne Supernova. So, but that was Jeff's pick, and I think that was probably one of those things where he really just loved the band and loved the production and loved the the post Beatlesque kind of compositions, and appreciated it. So it was. I think that was an appreciation pick.
Yeah, hip hop with kind of Beatles music with a bit of a hip hop beat. That's kind of how you can maybe characterize Oasis to a certain extent.
Yeah, maybe so. That's I never thought of it that way, but that's interesting. Yeah.
So much of that '90s pop rock music, for some reason putting hip hop beats on everything seemed to be kind of what was cool at the time. Either that, or you plugged into your angst and played stuff that sounded like Nirvana.
Mm.
I often bring this up with artists that made the bulk of their meat and potatoes catalog in the 80s, but I mean, how did you personally feel when that grunge stuff started to come into the limelight in the early 90s, George?
Well, initially I didn't see it coming. I mean, I was just blind to it, and you got me and the people around me got personally blindsided by it and hurt by it, because we were still working under the assumption that everything was the same as it was in the 80s.
Yeah.
And we're making records that way, and all that kind of stuff. Not that you should change to conform or anything like that. I'm just saying, but yeah, it was a period of adjustment, and I was trying to get my head wrapped around it. I'm very open-minded about things and want to, try new stuff and explore music that I'm not familiar with and all that kind of thing. So I was saying, well, what is this about this that is appealing or good or whatever? And then I, started figuring it out and getting it.
Yeah.
Don't play guitar solos in the middle of every song, and don't shred. Wear a flannel shirt and be depressed and talk about shit that matters. And throw off all the trappings of fucking silliness and superficiality, and I get it. So it was a learning, it was kind of a learning curve, and it affected my writing to a certain extent, a little bit, and it was just the 90s was really a kind of a vacuum for me, as far as I'm sure most of my contemporaries, as far as guitar music.
Yeah.
Because we all had to kind of take a step back, so it was probably one of my least productive periods. Not that I didn't work and wasn't productive, but I mean, I was kind of fishing around, so to speak.
Yeah, well, and then even when new metal kind of, reared its, debatably ugly head, there was still no guitar solos to be had. I mean, Dimebag was definitely doing his thing and keeping the flame lit in terms of guitar rock and shredding, though.
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, I had a project called Smoke This in the late 90s, 2000. That was, I should have called Lynch Bizkit. It had that Limp Bizkit thing,
right?
A little bit, but yeah, I loved it. I loved that music. In fact, I think Limp Bizkit was a great fucking band, and I'm actually a huge fan. I just saw them a few years ago. They were great. But yeah, I mean, it was a tough decade for sure.
No doubt. Well, now just getting back to this Heavy Hitters record now, I mean, given, COVID and all of the different rules and regulations and things like that, I mean, when you recorded this record, was it sort of done in isolation, or was this sort of done prior to the COVID time frame?
Well, both. We were working prior to, things being shut down and all that. And so Jeff and I had been working together. And then we had to stop working together. It started getting weird, and I started not feeling comfortable being in the studio with other people. So I just said, hey, we got to find another way to work, and we started working remotely. And it worked really well, actually, after we got past the learning curve of how to do it.
Yeah.
It was actually very, very productive. Arguably more productive than we were in person. So,
well, now... Yeah, we've talked a little bit about Bryan, but one thing I know about Bryan, I mean, of course, is he's a great fucking drummer, but I mean, he's also a pretty solid guitar player. So when it came to some of the arrangements and things, and also COVID regulations and doing things remotely, I mean, where did he fit into the whole spectrum, George?
Well, Bryan wasn't involved in anything other than just doing his awesome drumming, and he recorded his tracks with Jeff at his studio. And we, by the way, the three of us live in the same area, so we're all very close to each other physically.
Nice.
So it was easy to do.
Yeah.
And so he just laid down his drums, and that was it. And Jeff just tucked those into because the way we write is Jeff and I will work together under normal conditions at his studio, in person, and Jeff just does he laid down just a generic beat just to work on songs, and then when we get the arrangement figured out and I do my scratch guitars, he does scratch bass, or real guitars, whatever they are, then we send them over to the drummer usually, or the drummer comes into Jeff's studio and lays down drums there.
Yeah, no, I mean that's fair. I know this has been dubbed more of a Jeff Pilson, George Lynch project. I mean, totally understandable that Bryan would be laying down the drums and doing his thing. And I mean, he's a very good drummer, and he keeps things in the pocket, and he's obviously very adaptable, and and he's got his he's in on a lot of different projects these days.
Yeah, he worked the record that we did before that was the Lynch Mob 30th anniversary record, and he was much more involved in that than the Heavy Hitters record. We worked together here at the studio and at his studio a lot. Him and I did the pre-production on it, and he was actually producing the record, or co-producing it. He was very heavily involved in sounds and performances and ideas, and I mean, he tracked all the bass, and phenomenal. If you listen to the bass on that record, it's just insane.
Yeah.
Robbie Crane did it. Him and Robbie Crane mapped it all out over a few day period, and just did a phenomenal job. It's a bass player's record. It's just insane. And then of course, Bryan is just a monster drummer. Of course, but arguably the best at that style of drumming in the world, and the producer. And he's just really he's one of the jack of all trades guys, like Jeff Pilson is. They're one of these guys that are like Swiss Army knives, jack of all trades and masters of all trades. Like you said, Bryan's a really good guitar player. He's a writer. He's an engineer. He's a drummer. He can sing, he can play bass. He can probably play keyboards. I mean, I don't even know if he can. Probably play tuba for all I know.
You should ask him next time you have him on the line if he does play tuba.
Yeah, we're going to tell him we need a tuba solo. Just like, the best tuba solo for me is the Schmengies from SCTV, John Candy. I don't know that. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. I mean, it's been a while since I've seen that sketch, but
yeah, we were huge, by the way. Jeff and I were massive SCTV fans back in the day. We watched it in Dokken. We watched it every day on the bus. That's all we would do was watch Count Floyd and the Sammy Maudlin show and all that stuff. I mean, it was just Bobby Bittman.
Yeah,
I don't know where we go if I'm talking about SCTV, but anyways.
Yeah, it was a Canadian reference.
I bet you Canadians know that there's a lot of U.S. fans.
Right on, George. Well, listen, I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I mean, you got the Dream Punk project, of course, coming up in 2021. But apart from that, are you just sort of in a holding pattern because of COVID, or are there other things that are happening for you, as you move forward?
Well, we just delivered the End Machine record, Jeff and I.
Oh, nice.
With Robert Mason and Mick Brown's younger brother, Steve Brown, on drums. And it's great. And let's see, I finished and delivered a instrumental record to Rat Pack Records some months ago, and that's called Seamless, and that'll also be coming out next year. And I was in Nashville recently working with Ray Lazier on pre-production for KXM4.
Oh, wow.
So we're going to be working on that, probably taking our time. And we're going to try something different on this one out of necessity, since we can't be in a room together much. I mean, I wasn't in a room with Ray, but, in with masks, and we're just the two of us, the engineer in a different room.
Yeah.
But we can't all go into a room with our techs and the engineers in a studio and fly in and work together and stay in hotels. We can't do that this time. So this won't be done exactly the same way as the first three, but maybe it's time for a change, But I'll tell you, we just wrote 3 songs, Ray and I, and Doug's working with us on them, and they're just like all the other KXM songs. When we sit down together, we just sound like we sound, so it's going to be great.
I think that was the last project that I talked to you about. Was the first KXM record? I think that was the one.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I know.
So 5, 6 years. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah,
because I remember I interviewed Ray around that project as well.
Oh wow! Well, we'll do it again then when we get KXM 4.
Yeah. Well. Listen, man, it's been great chatting with you. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Sorry about the little bit of a mix-up there, and we'll talk again soon, and be safe. Have a great holiday.
Yeah, you too, man. Right back at you. Have a good one.
Okay, bye.